The whole purpose of the stress response is to make us move, is to make us take action. Because at this point, if it's a danger that's causing this stress response, our life depends on us overcoming this problem.
A little bit about Dr. Aimie. She specializes in preventive and addiction medicine. She holds master's degrees in biochemistry and public health with additional training in psychosomatic, functional medicine, and mental health nutrition.
If we take that child whose parents died in a plane accident, we're actually not still looking at the event, because what if they had the most amazing grandparents? And they were already really close to their grandparents, and their grandparents just took them in. And was that a real trauma then? What makes something a trauma is the...
Hi, my name is Chris Burris. I'm a longevity expert and the chief scientist at a lab focused on a longevity molecule. My primary focus is to help people live longer and better lives with science. Make sure to subscribe and share so you and your friends can live longer and better, so you and your friends can live beyond the norms.
Welcome to the next episode of the Live Beyond the Norms Health and Longevity podcast. I got my hands on an early copy of our next guest's book, and given the content, you are going to want to stay tuned for the entire episode. The book is The Biology of Trauma: How the Body Holds Fear, Pain, and Overwhelm, and How to Heal It. The author is a double board certified physician, Dr. Aimie Apigian. I promise I will go to Dr. Aimie now. A little bit about Dr. Aimie. That's a promise to her. She specializes in preventive and addiction medicine. She holds master's degrees in biochemistry and public health with additional training in psychosomatic, functional medicine, and mental health nutrition. To say that she is an expert in the psychological response to trauma is to greatly underestimate the time, focus, and attention she has given to understanding, applying, and even training in this area. To that point, she has actually written the book, as I mentioned, The Biology of Trauma. Dr. Aimie guides individuals and trains professionals worldwide on releasing trauma at its cellular roots through online courses, her podcast, The Biology of Trauma, and her summits. Her mission is to help people safely address stored trauma. Hopefully, I can support her on that mission today. Dr. Aimie, thank you so much for joining us.
I am so excited to be here. I really am. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
All right, good. So I bet you say that to all the hosts. Right.
No, because your angle, your level of research is unique. No one else has emailed me ahead of time and been like, so I'm doing a deep dive into your book so I can ask you all these great questions. And then you give me your questions and I'm like, he really did his research.
He actually did the research.
He actually did the research.
Well, thank you. I enjoy it, and hopefully that comes through. All right, but before we get into your area of expertise, I like to go further back. I like to go much further back. What was it like growing up, little Aimie? Where did you grow up? What were your parents like? If there was someone or some event that you could pinpoint as the reason you would ultimately become a physician, a podcaster, a trauma expert, and a published author, soon to be published author, right? What or who would that be?
I grew up in the best place to grow up. Northwest. I grew up in Washington State, and it was actually just on the east side of the Cascades, so it's not all the rain that Seattle gets. It's the mountains, it's the rivers, and it was a great place to grow up. We've got all 4 seasons there, and what little Aimie experienced was being the middle of 2 sisters. I have an older sister who is the smart one. I have a younger sister who's the beautiful one. And so that left Aimie to be the overachiever one. and
that sent you down the path. So the event was less of an event and more of a circumstance. So you're in the middle of medical school. You are fostering it, and you decide, I think, at that point to foster. You're fostering a child, and you decide to adopt your now son. Okay, well, first off, you're in the middle of this. Sounds like a daunting task. How does that come about?
Yeah, so remember that overachiever part, Chris, that I did?
This isn't enough. I can do more.
I did. I thought that I could do it all. And I really wanted to be alive. And so it was just this idea of I love to do things. I love to have my time be meaningfully spent. And I grew up with a father who had been adopted. And his mother, biological mother, had been a teenage mother. And so I think that I always had a heart for kids who were hurting, not even understanding the deeper layers of why yet, Chris. And as I then had a few months of space before I jumped back into third year medical school, I was just finishing my master's in biochemistry. That was when I said, I have the resources. Let me give back. Let me become a foster parent, with the intention of this is going to be temporary, because that's what foster parenting is. Foster parenting is I can help out now and let me help in where I can with hurting kids. So that was the original intention. And then life happened where they placed Miguel with me. And because of the circumstances, that led to my decision later on to adopt, which radically changed my life. Because yes, then it put me into a position where I am a single mom in medical school with a very traumatized child.
Now, we actually have something in common, and I'm going to tell you a really interesting story. So, Cassandra, who basically runs our office, on the smart days, I do everything she tells me to do, and nothing, and maybe some more, but that's on me. She's a little sister from the Big Brothers Big Sisters program, right? So she was a little sister of our wife. By the way, this is a very long recruitment process. If you're thinking about recruiting employees through this process, but it was such a profound, and we have another little a brother now. And I imagine, I know you have some relationship with Big Brothers, Big Sisters. How did that start? And then fostering, like that's a big step. Talk a little bit about that.
I did become a big sister when I was 16 or 17. And at that time I was already in college. And there in Wenatchee, Washington, where I grew up, I signed up to be this big sister. And I remember the girl that I was, mentoring, and starting to get a taste of all of the layers deep that this went. But of course, I really wouldn't see all the layers until I brought it into my home with foster parenting and then adopting. But this idea that I had a notion that, all these kids need is just love, and starting to realize they need actually a lot more than just love. Love is not what's going to heal them at this point.
And in fostering, did you foster a number of children before Miguel landed in your lap, or what, was Miguel the first foster child?
He was my first foster child, and then I took on a second one for a period of time. And then over the years, I actually became a therapeutic mom. So I would take in kids who had been adopted by other families and were really struggling, and they would come and live with Mama Aimie for a period of time. And that was years later, but it's been so rewarding to work with these kids. I've worked with kids now from all over the world, adopted from some of the hardest countries, Russia, China, Guatemala, and just the conditions in their orphanages set them up for so many struggles in life. And seeing those struggles then as they came into their families, and like Miguel, weren't trusting them, weren't accepting them, and thus not healing. And it was so painful for these parents, and still very painful for these children, to still feel all alone, even though they were being loved.
Yeah. So this kind of overriding message is love is not enough. Let's start digging into trauma. We're going to be talking about a lot of trauma. And I thought I'd throw this kind of zinger out there. How much did you learn in medical school about trauma? And maybe a really short answer.
Exactly. I think that, I went to a great medical school that is known for its mind-body medicine approach. And even with that, it was very much a focus on, there's this thing called the ACEs studies. And isn't that interesting? So what you should do, and this is what I actually did, Chris, and I'm so embarrassed about it now. When you are talking to your patients, you should tell them that they should go and see someone about their emotional health and, talk about those other things. And that was the extent of my training. And so that's what I did. I would see patients and they'd, start to tear up, or, I'm giving them sometimes hard news. I'm giving them a new diagnosis, right? Like, I don't know how to manage those emotions myself, let alone, working with someone who when I give them that kind of a diagnosis, it's going to go all the way back into their attachment and their early life. And I'm just the physician, right? And so being able to, pat myself on the back because I'm the physician who says, you should really go talk to someone about that.
That's the really progressive physician at the time, right?
That was the really progressive physician at the time, and probably actually still is.
Well, and the classic model, right? It's 15 minutes. Let's extend it to 30. Like, that's not enough to dig into like anything, right? Like, here's your Kleenex, and they're there in this moment, and like that's about it. What percentage of chronic disease do you believe is driven by stored trauma? And maybe comment on how much of that stored trauma is just unrecognized. Like, people don't even realize that it's stored trauma.
I believe that being human means that you have experienced trauma. And when I look at chronic health conditions, it creates a biology that even if you haven't had a lot of trauma, it's creating the same biology of a trauma biology. And so looking at the role of the nervous system, I feel is the real question. And the nervous system and its dysregulation is at the root of all chronic health conditions.
All of them. So approximately all.
Approximately 100%.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I think, anybody who's gone to any sort of good quality therapy, one of the things that you walk away with is like, everybody needs this. Right, like just everybody. And then people even people who don't do therapy will be like, yeah, everyone needs that. I'm not doing it, but everyone does. Is that same kind of parallel? Do you think with this, with this chronic health situation and trauma?
So one of the key concepts that I figured out for myself in my healing journey was that there is this aspect of trauma creates damage to my biology, but Chris, here's the kicker. That same biology creates a feedback loop, and it's actually creating more, I'm going to use this word again, nervous system dysregulation. That is the expression of trauma patterns, nervous system dysregulation. So now I have inflammation, I have oxidative stress, I have toxins, I have mitochondrial compromise, I have all of these things that even if they were entirely from previous trauma, I now am finding myself stuck in that trauma pattern because of my biology. So you take someone who maybe even has a genetic condition, purely genetic. There are very few purely genetic conditions, but let's use this as an example. Still, the biology that it creates is going to create messages for our nervous system that say, you're in danger. You're in danger. You're in danger. So our nervous system is in the stress and survival response, even if it's from our own internal biology. And so that is why I can say all chronic health conditions are in this feedback loop. And the feedback loop is a feedback loop of trauma biology because it's telling the nervous system we're in danger all the time.
Really reminds me, this kind of feedback loop and we're in danger, reminds me of a friend of mine. I'm very lucky to have him in my life because he helps me through all sorts of issues. And I actually want to get to levels of trauma to talk about that a little bit. One of the things he says is he describes the subconscious as having two characteristics. One is it's got a perfect memory, and two is it's got no sense of time. So that thing that happened, whatever, when you were often between 8 and 10 and can't process information well, or even further up, is happening now, and it happened a minute ago, and it happened, and then this is where we see this repeating in lives. Are you familiar with that kind of concept, and has that folded into your work?
It's fascinating to see the body. And I'll give you two examples. One was when the very first time I recognized watching myself going into a trauma response. And it happened when I was in general surgery residency. By now I had started to deep study trauma. And I'm now, for the very first time, Chris, being able to watch myself as a third person observer rather than just be caught up in the moment and the emotion of it. And I'm watching myself stand in front of my attending surgeon, who is tall and he's big. And Chris, he had these blue eyes. He was everything that my father was.
Oh, wow.
And I am responding as if I were a little girl standing in front of my father, being reprimanded for something else that I didn't do right, and feeling like the world was ending, that I was not going to be okay, and that I was not good enough, and all of these things. And it was happening as if I were that little girl. And I'm a grown ass adult.
Yeah, with lots of accolades and lots of skills and lots of experiences under your belt.
Didn't make a difference. I was still responding as if. So this element of it doesn't know the time difference unless we've resolved it. And that's one of the important aspects that I hope that we get to, is how do we actually resolve this so that our mind and our body, because they are two different layers, both need to be able to resolve a story so that it knows that was in the past. That danger is now completely over. There was another experience that had where it showed more of the body level. And this was an experience, I had an experience when I was 12. I'm not gonna go into the details, but someone woke me up. They had broken into my hotel room when I was 12, and they targeted me, and I roll over onto my right side. And the next thing I know, I have a hand that's covering my mouth, and they're telling me that if I move, they're going to kill me. Well, fast forward 10 years, 20 years, Chris, I am still having a panic attack in bed when I roll over to my right side and it's pitch black and I have a panic attack. I mean, it's like the body memory. And people will experience this if maybe they've had a car accident and they're driving down the same segment of road and they start sweating and their hands start gripping the steering wheel and their heart starts racing. There's nothing else that is indicating that they are in danger. It's just the body memory, and we get that memory through our senses. And so our senses being our body is seeing things that were associated with that accident at that time. And because we've never resolved it, it is still feeling like we are in danger right now. The danger is still happening. And we've got to learn how to actually say, that story is over. We need to have an ending to the story. And then our mind and body can go down that road or can turn over onto our right side when we're sleeping and stand in front of tall, big men with blue eyes and not have these kinds of responses.
So it's one of the things I really like, and I will make sure that we get to it, is like, it's not just the story, it's the physiology, right? And I think that's a really interesting piece that I hadn't really heard of. You talk about, just now, you kind of gave two examples of, an experience in a hotel room, and then this experience, with potentially your father scolding you and continuing to scold you even into your areas of expertise. Those are vastly different, right, traumas, right? People often talk about little T's and big T's. I want to give the audience some perspective because you've worked with so many people. Is there any like super small T that landed with you, that you've had to help somebody with, and you're like, part of you is like, that's barely a T, but it still has this dramatic impact. I don't know if anything comes to mind with that.
A ton of things come to mind. And the first thing comes to mind, Chris, is I don't want to talk about that. The reason is that we've put so much focus on the events. We've put so much focus on, well, what happened to you? And does that qualify? We need a qualifying event to be able to say that we've had trauma. To hell with that. What we actually need to start looking at is, do I have patterns of stored trauma showing up in my life, in my relationships, or in my health today? That's how I know that I've had trauma. We're not going to have much benefit in excavating the past, being archaeologists and being like, where's that qualifying event? Can I qualify? Because often what happens, Chris, is we get there and we're like, that was it? Oh, well, how am I supposed to use the word trauma when I can look over here and I can look at Miguel and I can look at all that he went through and the abuse and the neglect and the broken bone without being taken to the hospital and the hours without food and being passed around 20 different places and homes and never knowing where he belonged before the age of 4. And I'm going to say that my little thing is trauma too? No. And so it takes us down a path that I have found many people are so hesitant to go, and then they don't even want to use the word trauma. And so I actually wrote my book for people who don't think that they've had trauma, because I want to show them that's not how you know that you've had trauma. What we want to look at is experiences of overwhelm. So
Yeah,
that's now
let's
what
dive into that now. Like, I think that's great.
Yeah.
Kind of broader message is, hey, you may not think that you've ever experienced. There are people who have, great youths and their lives are amazing, and there's hardly anything to look back at that you would say, there's no way I experienced trauma. And then there's people who have clearly experienced trauma. And the reality is that you can have a negative physiological impact. And I will give one example. This is really, it is a big T, but think about the young child whose parents die on a plane crash and their response is, they left me, they abandoned me, right? Like, this is how you're like, well, as an adult, those things don't compute, right? And what you're trying to emphasize is, hey, these little things may not compute as trauma. So let's not even go there. Let's start digging into, how do we know that there's something that we need to deal with today? And so start walking us through that, please.
Yeah, and I love that. I'm just going to dovetail off of that then, because if we take that child whose parents died in a plane accident, we're actually not still looking at the event, because what if they had the most amazing grandparents and they were already really close to their grandparents and their grandparents just took them in? And was that a real trauma then? Well, what makes something a trauma is the inner experience of someone. So what I would want to ask that person when they come to me is, what was that like for you? What was the inner experience? And if they use words like, I was so lost, I fell apart, I lost myself. Okay, then that's the inner experience of a trauma. And then that's what I ask other people. I don't ask, here are all the different events that can happen. I ask, when in your life did you feel so alone, you felt like you were falling apart?
And that's going back to kind of identify the initial incident, right?
Any incidents, any incidents. As a child, do you remember a moment when you actually didn't want to be there? Something was happening. You couldn't stop it, but you were just a child, and you would have done anything to not be there in that room at that moment. So I am rephrasing it as describing their internal experience as opposed to what was happening outside of them, because that's then how we want to be able to identify really what is the degree of stored trauma that you might have today. It's all of those times. How many moments did you feel so lost, so alone, that you didn't know if you were going to be okay?
So you also will kind of often work backwards, right? From where you are physiologically today, mentally and physiologically today. Before we get there, let's talk a little bit about the difference between stress and trauma, right? And what, like, the way we might treat stress and how that doesn't work for trauma, and potentially vice versa. Like, because I think it's very easy for us, in this stressful world, modern era, to like, it's just stress, like, whatever, walk it off. But there's an important distinction.
There is an important distinction. And if it's okay, I'm going to tell the story that I share in my book around Kenneth. So Kenneth was a patient of mine. He was a veteran. And so he came into the VA hospital when I was working on general surgery rotation. And he walked in, Chris, and his bicep tendon was in the middle of his arm. I'm like, shit, it's not supposed to be there.
One of these things doesn't belong here.
There's a mass that doesn't belong in your arm. And I learned my anatomy, and that's not the right anatomy. So what had happened is that Kenneth had gone to the gym, and he had been lifting weights. He had lifted weights beyond his capacity. Rather than growing his muscle, he had broken his muscle. That is the difference between stress and trauma. Stress are those things that if we go through them and we're staying within our capacity, we can build our capacity, we can build our muscles, we can grow our personality, we can grow our emotional maturity. Stress plus rest brings growth. But we can do things, or things can happen to us that exceed our capacity. Those things break us. That is trauma. And it doesn't even have to be a thing. Many people that I've worked with, Chris, they come in and their trauma is because of a grief. But their grief is so big, it's bigger than what they have the capacity to feel, to process. So even our own feelings can cause a trauma response because they're bigger than what we can handle. So whether it's a weight in the gym or a feeling in our body, it doesn't matter. To the body, it's all the same. To our nervous system, it's all the same. We have a certain capacity, and our nervous system is going to shut us down when it sees that we are trying to do something that's beyond our capacity that could threaten our life. So Kenneth comes in, and what I could have done is been like, man, you stressed your muscle out, dude. You should do better stress management. In fact,
I think I've had that doctor, by the way. I'm just gonna share.
Let's teach you some stress management techniques, and let's have you do better self-care. So I'm going to give you an ice pack. I'm going to tell you to not go back to the gym for 6 weeks, and that will be your treatment. If I had done that, that would have been malpractice. That was not stress. That was trauma. And what trauma needs is surgery. We're booking you for surgery. We've got to reattach your tendon, and then we can do the whole recovery and rebuilding that capacity. But it's not Tylenol, an ice pack, and rest. It's surgery. And yet that's the same thing that people are doing as they're approaching their own body, and it being, was that stress or was that trauma? Yes, stress, rest. You need the downtime. You need that let down. You need your body's ability to return all the way to safety, which most people aren't doing anyway. But if that was trauma, that is not just what you need. It's a much more intentional process to bring the whole body and the mind back to a full sense of safety where it knows for sure that the danger is over. One of the examples that I see all the time still makes me mad. I go to a park and I see kids playing, and eventually one of the kids gets hurt, Chris. I mean, it just is inevitable, right?
That's what kids do. Yep.
That's what kids do. They fall off the swing. In this story, I'll say that the kid falls off the top of the slide. So the kid falls down off the top of the slide, and everybody rushes over. And the kid's just kind of sitting there stunned, right? Like, whew, stunned. That is a trauma response. That paralysis, that feeling stunned, is the body going into a trauma response. That's what it's supposed to do. A trauma response is not bad. It's just what the body does in order to recalibrate and reset around, well, that wasn't supposed to happen. I wasn't supposed to fall off the thing. But here's what goes wrong. All of the parents are like, oh, jump up, Joey. Let's see if you're okay. And they're creating so much noise and busyness that the body doesn't have the space to just reset to safety. What it actually needs is space and time and that ability to rest. And then it will come out of that stunned place by itself. And then the kid will naturally start to look around. And that's the time to really be like, hey, Joey, can you move your toes? Can you move your fingers? But we've got to allow the body to come out. And since we don't usually allow that, that's when these experiences just get stored in our nervous system without having the resolution at the time that they happened, like we are designed to do.
Hey, super quick break from the podcast. Hopefully you're loving it. This is a way you can support the podcast and take advantage of a great offer. We're offering 50% off of one of our MCT bottles. MCT is an amazing oil. Add the ESS 60 molecule to it. It's even more amazing. All you got to do is leave a review on iTunes, send us a notification that you've left that review. we'll get you a coupon code that'll get you 50% off of our MCT oil and free shipping. Back to the podcast.
So I want to talk about capacity and what we can do, because you talk about this in your book, and it's like this kind of ability to handle something as a stress before it becomes a trauma, right? And so I want to talk about that, but walk us through kind of the physiological response, because you get very nuanced here of what is happening in a trauma and like how one is managed well, right? And you gave us a great example, but like walk us through that, and then where it often gets broken, which is in that last piece.
Absolutely. There are 5 steps that the body takes to go into a trauma response. And it walks us through 3 different states of the nervous system. And people need to know that there are 3 different states. That's really important for them to know if they're going to start even working with their own nervous system and their own healing process. So we will say that, just for the sake of example, we're going to start our day in parasympathetic, in ventral vagal. Very few people do, Chris, but we're we'll say that
I relax as soon as I grab my phone. Isn't that great? Yeah.
That is definitely inducing parasympathetic. Yes. Yeah. And go compare yourself to everybody else on social media. You'll definitely be in parasympathetic.
Yeah, it'll be good. Here's a nice pack.
Yes, exactly. So we're in parasympathetic. And the first step towards a trauma is going to be a startle. Now, this startle is actually really important. And Chris, when I'm teaching people how to work with their nervous system, I have a whole 6-week course just on the startle and the stress response. The startle is so overlooked, but it's where we have one of our leverage points, and I'll explain more. So that startle is the moment when we first realize, it's a sense that we get, something's not right here. And I say that it's a sense because it's our nervous system collecting information from our sensory environment. So our senses, our 5 senses, what we see, what we touch, what we hear, what we feel, all of those are the senses. And so somewhere, somehow, we've seen something, we've smelled something, we've heard something, and something's just not right. That is the moment in our inner physiology when it starts to activate us. And by activation, I mean upregulate our energy level. And it does this through a hormone that's called noradrenaline. It's a sister to adrenaline. But the benefit of noradrenaline is that it's already prepackaged. It's already in our tissues. It's just waiting for that signal to say go. And so our sympathetic nervous system, those are the nerves that run down our spine, down our back. They are the ones that send that message to noradrenaline and say, go. And that's what makes us literally startle and jump.
Yep.
And you can feel that when you do that, your energy level goes up. Why? Because that's what it's intended to do. It's intended to make you hyper-focused, hyper-vigilant, in order for you to zero in on what is the problem and is it a problem. Chris, people have 15 seconds to figure that out. 15 seconds is what noradrenaline gives you to figure out, is this a real problem? Because if it's not, you don't want to go into the stress response. You don't want to escalate your physiology. You want to be able to return back to a sense of safety. So say, for example, you might startle because you're walking down the hallway and your kids jump out at you from behind the hall. And you're like, oh my goodness, wasn't expecting that. But you don't want to escalate all the way into a stress response and then a trauma response. Like, what you really want to do is you want to return to parasympathetic. You want to pick them up. You want to tackle them. You want to tickle them. And you have this great moment of co-regulation and you're back in a sense of connection. But most people are not even aware of that startle response. And so they don't know that they can redirect their nervous system at that point back to calm, alive, parasympathetic, ventral vagal. For them, they're so programmed by neuroplasticity that when that train leaves the station, it's going to go all the way. And this is actually a pattern that can be programmed in from our childhood on learned helplessness. We have been programmed to respond this way, just as if we were robots. We've been programmed to respond like everything is too hard for us. Everything is too big for us. I shouldn't even try. So I will let that train go all the way into overwhelm from a simple startle. And the next thing you know, I'm shaming myself. I'm telling myself how stupid I am, doing all of the things that I would normally do and feel in a trauma response. Maybe we'll come back to that later because we need to walk through this and we can't get stuck in the startle. The next
this is not healthy. Like we must keep it. Our 15 seconds is up.
15 seconds is up. And the point is that after 15 seconds, if you still don't know if it's a problem, well, that's a problem. And so either way, whether you've identified and confirmed like, yep, this is a real problem, or you still don't know, well, then either way, your body's escalating that. So the next step is that escalation, upregulation of energy. And the whole purpose of the stress response is to make us move, is to make us take action. Because at this point, if it's a danger that's causing this stress response, our life depends on us overcoming this problem. It's not just, well, it would be nice. We'll try if we can. No, my life depends on winning this sprint. I'm going to be giving it all I've got. And our whole physiology changes in order to be able to accomplish that, even down to our cells and our mitochondria, where the actual energy is made. It changes shape. They hunker down to be able to make more energy for us. What a lovely thought. My whole body is helping me overcome the problems in my life. Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so the whole stress response is now fueled by adrenaline. Cortisol, which is often called the stress hormone, is not the stress hormone. It's not even online yet. It's not even on the playing field yet. So cortisol doesn't really start appearing until 15 minutes into a stress response. Can start to peak around 20 minutes, which means that for the first several minutes, adrenaline is what you've got. And you want that because adrenaline is what makes us superhuman. That mom who lifts a car off of her child, that is adrenaline, baby. That is adrenaline at its best. You want adrenaline. You want pure adrenaline. And that's what the stress response gives us. So this is the stress response. Adrenaline, action, movement. The next step is what's going to take us into the trauma response. There are 2 steps in the trauma response. So this next step is what causes the 2 steps that are now fully into the trauma response. And what needs to happen is that the size of the problem appears greater than my capacity. The size of the problem. Now, maybe this is a real problem, and the reality is this is much bigger than me. And actually, if you look at nature and if you were to look closely at the video footage of a deer running from a lion, they become immobilized, that paralysis, that freeze response of the trauma. They do that before the lion even ever touches them. They don't stop because the lion pounces on them. They stop when they realize they're not going to be able to outrun this lion. And then the pouncing happens. It happens so fast in microseconds, you're not catching that the paralysis happens because I'm realizing I can't overcome this. And if I can't overcome something, it's better for me to switch survival strategies. As long as escape is possible, I'm going to stay in the stress response and I'm going to give it all I got. But the moment, and I call this in my book, hitting the wall, we hit a wall where there's nothing that we can do. We can't scale the wall. We can't go around the wall. We've hit the wall. And that wall is my capacity. I've reached the end of my capacity. There's nothing more I can do. And if that didn't work, well, then there's nothing I can do to make this bad thing from stopping. And in that moment, like just talking about it, I can feel my energy going like, just
and the wall.
Because that's what happens. And that's what it feels like inside of us. It feels like someone comes in and just turns the dial down. And we're wondering, how did that happen so quickly? Did it really change my DNA? No, it's not fast enough to change your DNA. This is a nervous system shift that goes from sympathetic nervous system, or my foot is on the accelerator, to I'm throwing on the emergency brake. And what's crazy, Chris, is that we have this unique moment in our physiology, that freeze response. When we realize, when we hit the wall, it immediately causes that freeze response. That freeze response is the only time in our physiology where we have our foot on the accelerator all the way down, and we have the emergency brake on, both at the same time, which means that we have this really high panic. Our foot is on the accelerator. We have the really high panic of the sympathetic nervous system and the adrenaline. It hasn't gone anywhere. It doesn't magically disappear just because we're not moving anymore. It's still there, and it's causing so much panic. And this is what it feels like inside. It feels like what's happening is unbelievable. There needs to be that element in a trauma response for it to be a trauma response. It has to be something that goes so against what we thought would happen, what we believed life would bring us, that we would believe what could happen in life. It has to be so unbelievable that that's part of the shock that paralyzes us. And inside in our physiology, our body has thrown on the emergency brake, because now we've shifted from the stress response, which is using up energy, to the trauma response, which is all about and only about conserving energy. So now our body says, how do I protect your energy? You don't have much left. You used up quite a bit, but how do I protect your energy so that if you might have an opportunity later on to escape, you would still have the energy to be able to do that? And so this is where our breath stops for a moment and then becomes shallow, because it takes energy to take deep breaths. And our body is like, well, I don't want you to die, but I also need to do the bare minimum to stay alive, because we don't want to use up our energy. And if we think about this physiologically, a lot of other authors have written about this, where this is where if we aren't breathing, well, then the monster may not hear us. If we stop moving, the monster may not see us. It even shuts down our metabolism, Chris, which means that our core temperature changes by a few points of degrees. And that helps, because if I'm cold, the monster may not sense my warmth. And that's how animals sense each other as well. They also sense it by their temperature, their warmth. So all of these things are happening now, and it's still a survival response, but it's a very different survival response than stress. And so that is why the physiology and what happens inside of us is so much more important than what is the exact event or situation that's happening outside of me. It's really all about what's happening inside, because that's where the damage is happening, but also where then the opportunity is to understand, this is where my body is gone, and this is what it will need to come back out.
So we've got starting in parasympathetic, right? And then you've got startle is the first one, escalation. I mean, because I might have missed one here. 3 is hitting the wall.
Yes.
Does that sound right? 4 is the freeze response. And I find it really interesting, this concept of accelerator and brake. And in my mind is like, hey, we're trying to do, we're very familiar with fight or flight, right? Or freeze, fight, flight, or freeze. We're in the freeze state because we're like, flighting isn't going to work right now. But we're also got the airplane has the brakes on, but the engines are revved, because if there is a moment where we could escape, like that still might be a possibility. So that's ready to go. And then what was number 5? I think I missed number 5.
5 is the shutdown. It's that full
shutdown.
shutdown into the slower breathing, the lower metabolism, the conservation of energy. So at that point now, our foot is coming off the gas, because that's just using up gas. That's just using up energy. I can't afford to do that anymore. So now it's just the brake.
That's okay. So great. You did a very interesting parallel of kind of cellular function and this trauma response that I was like just drawing this parallel and let's keep it a little quick because of time, because I want to get to how we can have more capacity. But like, what's that parallel real quick?
Yeah, it's fascinating to see that the cells are very different under stress response and a trauma response. And in a stress response, they are responding to the adrenaline. And the adrenaline is going to tell them to make more energy. They change shape, their membranes change, their proteins change, everything changes in order to make more energy. But, and this is the really interesting part of the science, Chris, if the amount of adrenaline outside of a cell is telling it, I can't respond that much.
Yeah.
If it were,
I hear your message, but
adrenaline,
it's not going to happen.
exactly. It's looking at me like, yeah, no, can't do that. That is the trigger then for the cell saying, I need to shut down rather than rev up. And so the shutting down then is that freeze and then the shutting down. And at the cellular level, that really does look like shutting down. It looks like membranes starting to fall apart. It's no longer able to keep the calcium and the sodium and the potassium and all the different compartments that they're supposed to. It falls apart. And now proteins are leaking. And when these proteins leak, they go to the DNA. That changes which genes you are making, and it creates genes that are saying, shut down, we've got to shut down. It also sends proteins out to the outside of the cell, what we call the extracellular matrix. That signals to other cells, hey, we're shutting down. You should probably shut down too.
Yeah.
And now it's becoming this system-wide thing, not just a one-cell thing, a system-wide thing. And so even at the cellular level, there is a huge difference between a cell being able to hunker down and make more energy for us versus a cell that's shutting down and falling apart and making less energy for us.
So you can easily see this progression as, you know, as we start off evolutionarily as very simple, multi-celled animals, and it's having this response, and then that response just it's actually cascading up. It's not that our emotional experience is cascading down into our cells. It's actually our cellular experience is cascading up into our emotions. I think that, I love that kind of stuff. Anyway, all right. So,
well, and if I can just
yeah.
include something there, because, like so often we've been taught how much our thoughts change our biology. And Chris, I'm seeing that most of the time it's the other way around. Our cells are creating our thoughts. So if I'm noticing a thought like, oh, I'm so stupid. Well, rather than just, snap the rubber band on my wrist to punish myself for having a bad thought, why don't I say, it looks like my cells are feeling like they are in danger. What do they need for support so I can build their capacity? And they're not going into this overwhelm. It's a cellular response that's creating our thoughts. Now, it is still true that those thoughts then create that loop and they further, create the dysregulation in our cells. But the majority of what's happening is that our thoughts are just an expression of what's happening at the cellular level.
Okay, fascinating. So you talk about having a capacity, right? And so there may be some days where you have a trauma response to a particular action, and then other days you might have the exact same activity happen and you might not have a trauma response. And this is kind of predicated on your capacity. Talk about, give maybe a better description of capacity, and then what are things that we could do to increase our capacity?
Absolutely. So I'm going to guess that there have been days when your wife can tolerate you. And then there are some days.
That's a good assumption. That's a big assumption, but carry on. We'll go with that.
And why is that? Right? Like, why is that? Why you're doing the same thing? You're not any different. She's having a very different response day by day based on what's happening inside of her cells. And so there's this idea that, yes, we have a cellular capacity. And that's our capacity for that moment. There are things that we can even do throughout the day that will build or decrease our capacity. But I think of that capacity as like a bank account. And however many funds are in that bank account is my capacity. And if an invoice comes through that's expecting a withdrawal from more than the funds that I have in the account, well, that's my trauma response. I'm going into the negative. If the invoice comes in and if it's less than the funds that I have, well, I can pay that. And I still have a little reserves. That's a stress. That's not a trauma response. And so this idea that my capacity is like a bank account, then I can look at, well, what are those things that are taking withdrawals out of my bank account? And how do I put money back in? How do I fill that capacity account back up? And we look at everyday things that drain our capacity, decisions, everything that takes energy takes a withdrawal from our energy capacity. So what are the things that take energy? Every decision takes energy. Exercise takes energy. Working takes energy. Thinking takes energy. My goodness, everything takes energy. Exactly. And that's why trauma is an energy problem. If we had more energy in our capacity account, we'd be able to stay in stress. We wouldn't be overwhelmed by it. Our account wouldn't be overdrawn. And so then we get to look at, well, how do I build my capacity then? And those are things like looking at what creates moments of true felt sense of safety. For some people, that will be being out in nature. For other people, it will be connecting with their friends. For other people, connecting with friends drains them. Doesn't fill them up, it drains them. There are things that will fill everybody's capacity, like quality sleep, quality nutrition, sunlight, aligning your body with your natural rhythms so that you are waking up at your cortisol timing and getting outside into the natural light. You're wearing the blue light blockers in the evening. Like all of these things are ways to build your capacity and decrease the number of withdrawals on that same capacity account.
It feels like, we talk about in relationships, you've got to deposit into the emotional bank account, right? To have good quality relationships that deliver value to both people. It feels very much like that. And I saw a talk, Dr. Huberman talked about the and I'm reading this, AMCC, anterior mid cingulate cortex. I think I got that right, which is a region of the brain. And he talks about how that region expands when you do hard things. Are you aware of any association with that kind of region and trauma response?
It's a huge part of the trauma response. Because if you have been programmed since childhood that you can't do hard things, then that area is so small because it's not being used. It's this area of the brain that collects all of this information to be able to know, where do I put my attention? Where do I put my efforts? And how do I respond to this? And so if you are programmed to always respond with just, well, that's too big for me, that's too hard for me, that area never gets developed. And so you can be an adult and still be responding to problems as if everything is too hard for me. And that is then what we see when we start building our capacity. And it's building our capacity in even our sense of our own abilities. I need to believe that I am strong enough. I need to believe that I can do hard things to even try to do that hard thing. But here's what a lot of people get wrong is that when they then get into that mode of building their capacity, they're simply trying to use mindset, Chris. And they think it's only mindset. And so they're trying to use their mind to be like, we can do this. We can power through. And that's exactly what it becomes, powering through. And you're actually overriding your body when you're trying to power through. And your body's trying to tell you, this is my capacity for today. And your mind is saying, no, I want you to have this capacity. And that's when we're still exceeding our capacity and our brain is going to get frustrated that our body can't keep up and our body's going to shut down and basically say, you're not listening to me, so I'm throwing on the brake because you won't stop and you're not realizing that you're exceeding my capacity. So the idea is then, and I love how Huberman talks about this, where it's this idea of staying within your capacity as you build your capacity. And there's that idea of like stress and rest. Stress it, right? Like, yes, go to the gym and lift the weights because that's how you build your muscles. It's the same thing with dealing with emotions. Yes, start feeling your emotions. And at the same time, Chris, I'm going to be very clear that if someone has not been feeling their emotions for most of their life, please do not all of a sudden decide, I'm going to feel them all. You are going to get overwhelmed and you're going to have that same experience of, this is too big for me. I should never do this again. Instead, what I would want them to do is baby step it. Say, I'm going to give myself 2 minutes to just feel what I'm feeling, and then I'm going to stop. Because 2 minutes is still within my current capacity, and it's allowing me to stay within my capacity as I build my capacity. And that's then actually how we see these changes in our brain structures, like the AMCC, where we can see visual evidence of, see, I am becoming a better version of myself.
It's an interesting thing because part of expanding the capacity is to drain, really does require to drain some of your current capacity, right? So you don't want to drain it to the point that you're going to enter this kind of trauma state, but you've really got to, you're doing hard things, and hard things drain capacity. But by doing those hard things, you're expanding the overall capacity when you allow that recovery to happen. And recovery is such a key part of these things. So one of the things you talk about, so break down, all right, now we've accepted this. How are we going to, how do we fix it? And there's one piece that you really, maybe we'll tease it and tease them into the book, which they can buy it already, right? They can pre-order the book already. Which is, there's one piece that is missed, which is this last physical release. I don't know if you can squeeze that into 5 minutes and leave that dangling piece so they go get your book.
Absolutely. You're talking about the somatic work and this idea of muscle memory. I want to share a story with you, which is actually a research study done by the researcher neuroscientist Seligman. This was back in the 1960s. I'm sure you're familiar with it, but your audience really needs to know this to understand this somatic piece. And the study is that he took dogs. I'm so sorry. He took dogs and he put them in a container. And there were 2 sides to this container. The sides were separated by a very low barrier that the dogs could easily jump over. One side of this container had a mat that provided electrical shocks. The other side of the container was perfectly safe. He put all of the dogs on the side with the mat, and he tied half of them to the wall by their harness. He turned on the mat, starts shocking the dogs. All of them tried to escape, as they naturally would, as we would. They all tried to jump. The ones that are tied to the wall, they are trying, but they can't, and they don't understand why they can't, and they don't understand why their friends are escaping, and they can see them, and they're happy, and they're safe, and they're not being shocked, and why me? There must be something wrong with me. So he takes those same dogs, he does the same experiment, except this time he doesn't tie any of them up. No dog is tied to the wall this time. He turns on the mat. The dogs who had jumped over before, they knew what to do. They didn't even stress about it this time, Chris. It was just kind of like, it was that startle. It was like, oh, there's a shock. I know what to do about it. I know how to escape. This isn't even a stress. The dogs who had been tied up before, did they even try to jump this time? No. And in fact, Chris, what they did is that those dogs laid down on the mat and whimpered. This is the power of our early programming and us being told, whether that was with words or not with words, that we weren't capable, that we weren't whatever it was. We learned to not even try. So he takes these dogs, and here's the really important part that I want to bring in around the somatic work. And he tried everything to train the dogs, these same dogs that weren't jumping over now. He wanted to train them to jump over because he wanted to heal them. He wanted to fix them, right? It's like, how do I undo this trauma that I've caused? And he tried everything. He even tried treats. Let me put treats and let me put them right here, just over the barrier so that they can see them, they can smell them. Did the treats work? No. Every parent should hear that. The treats did not work because they were programmed to believe, I can't jump over the wall, because that had been their previous experience. So what they had to do, and this is the coolest thing, they found that the only way to reprogram these dogs to now be able to jump and be dogs again was they had to move their leg muscles for them. So they had to create the shock, and then they moved their leg muscles in the same way that they would if they were jumping, and then they helped the dogs make the movement and jump over the barrier. So that is the only way that then they were able to reprogram the nervous system of these dogs so that in the future, they also could now jump over the barrier when a shock happened. It's the same thing for us. So I had an experience where I was 12 and I had that turning over effect, and I wanted to reprogram because my body was still having that response. I waited until I had enough foundational skills where I knew I could return to a felt sense of safety whenever I needed to. But then what I did was one day I was feeling strong and capable. Like, you're ready for this, Aimie. And I put myself in a bed, but I also made sure that there were enough other things that were different so that my brain and my body could be like, it's similar, but it's different. I think we're okay. I didn't want to go into the story. I just wanted to work on the story. There's a very key difference. And I then allowed my imagination to take me back to that moment in time when I first sensed that something was wrong. And I allowed myself to pause the story and feel into my body and say, what do I want to do right now? Well, I want to get up. I want to look around. I want to see what is wrong. I don't want to just roll over and assume, because that was what was dangerous for me. And now I did the movement that I would have wanted to do back then. And then I allowed myself to go one step further because that had been successful. I hadn't freaked myself out yet. So I allowed myself to go one step further, and I imagined that hand coming over my mouth again. And again, now I can pause the story. And that's a really important aspect around working on a story, is that we have the ability to pause and create the space for ourselves that we never had at that time. So for people working with a car accident, for example, we'll imagine seeing that car coming towards us, but now we can stop the car. We can pause the car. Be like, okay, I see the car, and give myself time to think about, what do I want to do now? And that is not time that we had at that moment, which is partly why it was a trauma for us. And so this time I imagined the hand, and I allowed my body to pause and say, okay, what do I want to do? Oh, Chris, like, I want to turn over to my left side. I want to punch. I want to kick, and I want to bite. And I allowed myself to do the movement. And that's really what I want to express here, is whether it was dogs with the learned helplessness study or our body and what we went through, we actually have to do the movement. It's not going to be enough to just think, visualize, reframe. No, we've got to actually do the movement for our body to say, whew, I've overcome that. Now I know for sure that it's in the past and it's no longer an active danger that's always in the background.
So it's kind of like going back to step 3 and then taking action instead of freezing,
Yes,
right? Like, let's get to step
exactly.
3 and then let's change the course and kind of rewire us. That's pretty powerful stuff. I mentioned I'm very lucky to have a gentleman by the name of Patrick Wanis, subconscious rapid transformation technique, and he does a lot of things like this in visualizations. I'll probably put you guys in contact. This has been an amazing conversation. We will get a place where you can give out links topics. Anything kind of in general before we get into our wrap-up questions? Or I think we covered at least a lot of what I know that you know.
I think so. And I think I would just want to reemphasize that trauma is actually a message of hope. Mm-hmm. We have had it be so heavy just because we haven't actually known what to do about it. And so we've just felt like, oh man, that sucks. It sucks for you that you had that kind of childhood, or, whatever it is. And realizing that now that we know more of the science, there's so much more that we can do. And that brings a lot of possibilities and hope.
Awesome. Thank you for what you do in your work. Let's get into our questions. Dr. Aimie, do you have a target age that you want to live to?
98.
I love it. And how long do you think humans can live?
112.
112. And then I wrote 212. That's the boiling point. We'll jot down 112. What are 2 to 3
boiling point? Now, isn't that interesting? The boiling point, just coming out and talking about the trauma response.
So what are 2 to 3 protocols, habits, mindsets? Let's call them shortcuts because everybody likes shortcuts for longevity and a long health span that you would share.
The protocols that I would share relate to the nervous system healing. And I would do infrared radiation, red light therapy, NAD, and quality sleep.
Sleep. Love it. And are there anything that you think people get absolutely wrong regarding longevity and a long health span?
I think there is so much that people get wrong about longevity because they're focused on their symptoms and their physical health, not what's driving that, which is their nervous system.
So a symptom focus is something that people are getting wrong. Love it. How can people contact you?
They can find me at biologyoftrauma.com.
And they can pre-order the book there, right?
They can order the book there. They can find the book on Amazon. I've got resources on my website for the book. So even if they order it on Amazon, come over to the website because I've got resources and all kinds of goodies related to the book.
Okay, excellent. And what in the near future are you excited about?
I am excited about the evolution of AI into the field of mental health and what is possible with that.
Yeah, I've had conversations with my friend Patrick, and there's so many opportunities. It's pretty mind-boggling, right? All right, so you can find her and her book, biologyoftrauma.com. Dr. Aimie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Chris.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Live Beyond the Norms podcast. Make sure to subscribe and follow. Also, make sure not to be that guy, the guy sharing this podcast with people who are not interested in living beyond the norms. If you would like to learn more about the ESS60 molecule, the molecule responsible for the single longest longevity experimental result on mammals in history, a full 90% extension of life, visit myvitalc.com. That's myvitalc as in carbon.com.